142,000 fans went to the 73rd World Championship British Grand Prix, hoping many of them to see British driver Lewis Hamilton avenge the World Championship defeat he suffered in Abu Dhabi last December. They didn't get that, but they did get Lewis Hamilton on the podium and with fastest lap. But it was this man, Carlos Sainz, at the 150th time of asking, taking his first Grand Prix victory, and very well deserved it was indeed for the Spaniard. It's a fantastic British Grand Prix. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the GoF1 Show, a special show, I think. We've got so much to discuss in the relatively limited time. Do join us in the conversation, as always. You know the handle, at GoF1 Show. We've got plenty to discuss about the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. We're also going to be, later in the show, finding out more about ESPN's new TV deal in Formula One for the USA. We're going to be trying to get inside the mind of Max Verstappen. We're going to be catching up with the progress of India's F1 hopeful, Jahan Darulla. But before all of that, let's get inside the mind of Malaysia's only Formula One driver, Alex Yoong, joining us. Welcome.
Hey, Matt. How's it going? I know it's late at night, but that was a super exciting race. We saw some really, really good wheel-to-wheel action. I think the best wheel-to-wheel action we've seen all year since perhaps Saudi Arabia.
And that was the question, wasn't it, coming into this year, is that we knew the cars should be, with the new aerodynamic regulations, be able to follow more closely. Could they race more closely? The evidence is stacking up, I think, that they can. Let's have a look at the recap of the race that Miko's put together for us. Alex, if you could take us through the key points.
Yeah, obviously we had that first lap shunt with quite a few cars sticking out, but Joe ending up over the barrier. Thankfully, he was okay. Sainz had a dreadful start on that first attempt and was actually P2, but at the restart, he got it right and led. He was also one of the first to stop on lap 21 for what was supposed to be a one-stop race. But he just didn't have the pace, did he? After those pit stops, Leclerc was ordered, or shall I say Sainz was ordered to let Leclerc pass. And then it got exciting again with that safety car up to take Ocon's car at Cops. And after the safety car went in, wow, wheel-to-wheel action. Sainz taking the lead from his teammate right on the restart. And then later on, we had Perez going through as well, and Hamilton wheel-to-wheel for like half a lap with Leclerc before Hamilton would finally take the third step on the podium.
In our last show, the Canadian Grand Prix, you and Bob Constanduros were talking about Carlos, and you said he'd win plenty of races, but perhaps not going to be one of the greatest. And I was thinking, I'm not sure Carlos is ever going to win a race, because he's one of those drivers who, you know, he's been 5 times a runner-up, hasn't he? But you were absolutely right. So I guess the question we've got to say, first of all, here is, was it a great victory? Did Carlos Sainz deserve to win the British Grand Prix?
He did get a bit lucky, but sometimes you do need a little bit of luck. I mean, that safety car definitely helped him, because he and Hamilton took advantage of the safety car to go to the soft tires, but Leclerc surprisingly stayed out on the hard tire, and that was why Carlos got by. Because even though, you know, Carlos did manage to put it together to get pole position yesterday, he did not have the race pace of his teammate, did he? You know, Leclerc had that small front wing damage on the front right, and he could still pressure Sainz. And in the end, the team said, "Look, let Leclerc go through," which I think was the right call at the time, because Hamilton was closing in on the pair of them. So. Yeah, he definitely deserves the victory. You know, any driver there to cross the line deserves a victory, no matter what. But, you know, Sainz will also go back to the driver briefing, and he'll be looking very carefully at the data. Because you also then find out after Parc Fermé that his teammate would have had a broken wing, and that will worry him. You know, he'll go back to the debrief and go, wow, he was so quick with a broken front wing, so I really need to do a bit more work to understand what I need to do to be quicker in the race.
Yeah, he'd be saying, I want one of those broken front wings, because with 5%, or whatever it was, 5 points of downforce loss, Charles, as you say, was comfortably quicker than Carlos. I thought what won Carlos the race there, and what if you like, you know, he deserved the win, was that he Ferrari having bungled that last pit stop, we'll talk about that in a second. Then they told Carlos, didn't they, back up 10 positions on the grid. Sorry, for the restart behind the safety car. And he said, no, don't do that. And he was deciding, as he was, wasn't he, as you said, on the restart, turn 1, he was very robust in defending the lead against Max Verstappen. He really looked like a guy who decided, today is my chance to win a Grand Prix. So we need to talk about that. Yeah,
I was just going to say, no doubt. I mean, even though we may have some question marks whether he'll be a world champion one day, I do think Sainz believes he'll be a world champion one day, and he's pushing. And that's really why it's so good to see him come on the radio and say, no, I'm not backing up anyone. I'm going to get as close to my teammate as possible and try and beat him. And it's great that he still has that attitude.
It was a big question, wasn't there, during the race about team orders? Because, as you mentioned, they had to ask Carlos to move out. Well, we've actually got a question from the audience. Here it is from John, the storyteller, one of the friends of the GoF1 Show. Thank you, John. Is Ferrari in a position to be more brutal with team orders? It's a good question because of the history of Ferrari, I suppose, and the strength of it as a team. Are they being more brutal, or are they just being indecisive? Or maybe the answer is yes.
Yeah, they're definitely being indecisive, aren't they, Matt? You know, because the first half of that race before the pit stops, Leclerc was already complaining about that. You know, I'm faster, let me through. And I wouldn't blame Ferrari for telling Sainz to let Leclerc go through at that point. But no, they said, no, you guys are there to race. So you have to race, you know, you're free to race. I think it was the exact term they said. And then they, after the pit stops, decided to change their mind and say, no, let Leclerc through. And so, but, you know, this is quite consistent to see this inconsistency with Ferrari at the moment. And when I see a team changing such a big policy like team orders inside a race, you know it's someone from up high calling down and saying, hey, look, what are you doing? You know, why are you doing this? You know, it's always 99% of the time, it's always because there are too many cooks in the broth. You know, so that's still not a good sign. It's a worrying sign for me for Ferrari.
And it's the indecisiveness, isn't it? Because with the teams that do it well, you almost don't notice the team orders because it's almost like they've had the opportunity to think this is going to happen, which, by the way, I mean, you could sit down in January and work out that at some point during a Grand Prix, there's going to be moments when you're going to have to tell somebody to overtake the other. It always does strike me when these happen that it's the first time, wow, we're going to have a situation where we need to swap the drivers around, and it's a bit of a shock for everybody. The Ferrari team, I don't know whether that's just because we pay more attention to them because we've got that perception of them.
Yeah.
Lewis Hamilton. Great drive from him today, I think. But he disappointed he didn't win, do you think?
Yeah, I was surprised he didn't defend against Perez more robustly once he was through. I was surprised he wasn't more robust on the restart after the safety car. But other than those two small moments, what a great drive! You know, that's Hamilton driving like he does. You know, he had a lot of cars between him and the top three after the second restart. You know, he had to find his way past Norris. He had to find his way past Perez, but he was very calm and thoughtful and picked his moments well. And then he was over 5 seconds behind the top three, and he just kept chipping away, getting closer and closer. And he made those, and he did that while looking after those medium tires. You know, he went a good 5-6 laps longer than Leclerc, 7 laps longer than Sainz before he had to take that pit stop. So, you know, I really enjoyed watching Hamilton, the way he was driving, what he does best, how quick he can go without killing the tires. And I think if he'd won today, he would have deserved it. But I think the restart after the safety car, that's pretty much where he lost it. You know, if he'd been able to challenge Sainz right at the restart, like Sainz was trying to challenge Leclerc, it could have been a different result for him.
And I made some notes as the race was going on at the beginning. He took that position, didn't he? P4 from Norris. He was 8 seconds off the lead. And then on that was lap 6. Lap 11, 7 seconds off the lead. Lap 16, 5 seconds off the lead. Lap 19, 4 seconds. Lap 22, 2.2. Lap 25, 1.2. And the point there is that the Mercedes in Lewis Hamilton's hands, and George was obviously out of the race, retired at the first corner, was the fastest car on the track, even when Max's car was working well, I think. What do you think? It's got to be encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, okay, Hamilton also was closing down that period because Sainz was holding up Verstappen. I still think on the day the Red Bull probably was the fastest car if they hadn't had those issues, both drivers damaging their cars and stuff. But that's arguable. Mercedes definitely though is quick, right? It's definitely a car that can challenge for wins, especially on these kind of tracks where it's very smooth. But clearly they need to try and make the operating window of that car a bit wider, because it's a very small operating window, and when you can get it in that window, it works. It's quick, arguably the quickest car out there. Like we saw in Barcelona and we saw today in the British Grand Prix. But the window's too small at the moment, and in the wet yesterday we saw that as well. It was quite quick. If Hamilton put his lap together, he would have been further up in qualifying. But normally the wet is a real strength for the Mercedes car.
Well, here's the critical question, and it's come in from Maxwell Davis, and the question is, without a safety car, would Lewis Hamilton have won the Grand Prix? Because I think Lewis was unhappy, wasn't he, coming out of the pits? He felt, I think, that he was on good tyres, those hard tyres, and they were younger hard tyres compared to the Ferrari drivers around him. So what do you think? Would he have won without the safety car?
No, I don't think so. That pit stop was too slow. He lost just under 2 seconds at the pit stop, and he just put him back too far back. If he'd pitted, I feel if he'd pitted a lap early and he had a perfect pit stop, and he'd been right behind him, I think he would have had a chance for a win. But he had too much to recover. Leclerc had too much pace in hand, and even though Leclerc's tires were older than Hamilton's, they weren't massively older. The offset wasn't that huge. I mean, I think Hamilton would definitely have got Sainz, but I don't think he would have got Leclerc without a safety car.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Let's have a quick look at the results to remind ourselves of the top 10, because we've obviously spoken about the top 3. Lewis Hamilton being the third of those 3. I'm going to just get the results in front of me. So Carlos Sainz, it was, who won the Grand Prix, of course, as we said, from Sergio Perez in the first of the Red Bulls. Lewis Hamilton third with fastest lap. Charles Leclerc fourth. Fernando Alonso fifth for Alpine. Lando Norris sixth for McLaren. Max Verstappen seventh for Red Bull. Mick Schumacher eighth. Sebastian Vettel ninth, and Kevin Magnussen 10th. So let's talk about Red Bull now and Sergio Perez. That was a pretty lucky second place, you've got to say, right?
Yeah. So I mean, but what do you think, Matt? I mean, I think Perez got a bit unlucky, didn't he, in that first lap? He got squeezed between 2 cars. At one point through, was it turn 1 to turn 3? There was almost 4 cars side by side going through there, and for 2 cars just to end up losing end plates was a miracle. I thought for sure we were going to have 1 car in the air backwards. So Perez got unlucky with that, but then he got lucky with the safety car, didn't he? And the safety car was the only reason he was able to finish P2.
Yeah, so that's a good point, isn't it? He had that clash with Charles that Charles caused, as you say. Charles diving up the inside and damaging both cars. Came into the pits, came out in 17th place, 37 seconds off the lead, and was steadily making his way up through the field. But lap 41, that safety car allowed him to get from the hard tyres onto the soft.
Yeah.
So good recovery, which is what we typically see from Sergio, but he was 0.6 of a second off Max in qualifying. And it seems that closeness he had to him on pace at the beginning of the year, that seems to have evaporated a bit.
Yeah, well, let's just talk about that qualifying, though. I mean, for to be in the wet, to only be 0.6 off Max Verstappen is a good job, I think. We know Perez is pretty handy in the wet also, but he's not particularly special. I mean, in his previous team, Lance Stroll always used to beat Perez in the wet, if you might remember. Remember Turkey? Where Stroll had his pole position. So, and Verstappen's, he's such a weapon in the wet. He'll be kicking himself not taking pole position. Every time he went out in the wet in qualifying, and I just watched him, I was just like, it was really quite special, and I love those conditions because that's where drivers really excel. And it's not just about doing 1 lap. In every condition in qualifying, as it dried, and as it got wet again, Verstappen was super quick. Another driver that was like that was Alonso. Okay, yes, Sainz got it together at the very end, and he put it on pole. But even he said it wasn't a special lap. I think it was more a case of Leclerc and Verstappen not putting together the laps when it was at the very end.
And it was also a point, wasn't it, in qualifying when Max in Q3 spun, and despite having done a complete 360 spin, crossed the finish line and was third fastest at that point, despite that spin. So I think you're right. It was an unfortunate. It was an unfortunate. It was unfortunate qualifying, and it was also an unfortunate race because I think he had the pace clearly to win, and if he hadn't had the problem with seat, they don't know exactly what it was, do they? They think perhaps floor damage on his Red Bull car that happened on about lap 20, perhaps caused by running over some debris. We were saying perhaps because until there's a proper strip down of the car, they won't know exactly what it was. And his just pace was horrible after that and ended up, as we saw in the results, 7th. I suppose that was to some degree damage limitation for him, really.
Yeah, damage limitation. I mean, you know this as well, Matt. I mean, for a driver to feel like you have a puncher, then you know something's very seriously wrong, you know. So, yeah, he could have lost a chunk of downforce if that car felt like it had a puncher. So to carry on and finish, you know, what the team did to help with that, though, was adjust the front wing. I think you heard the commentators saying, oh, okay, so the next pit stop, they're going to try and fix the floor. Didn't see anyone fixing the floor. There's no way you can fix the floor during pit stop. There's just not enough time. But what you can do is you can take off a lot of front wing, and that's what they did. They took off some holes of front wing, so at least there would be more of a balance. It wasn't so oversteery, and even though the grip is still not there, it's still going to be slow. The balance of the car would have been better.
Yeah, it would have been, yeah. So I suppose from his point of view, just getting some points at the end and not, losing everything makes Silverstone not too much of a disaster. Speaking of disasters, let's talk about what happened at the first start of the British Grand Prix, which was the crash we talked about, GoF1 News, horrific crash, ending up, as you said, Alex, over the barrier. And we saw we haven't got any footage here, of course, but we saw, this is when it started to happen, George Russell tapped the back of him. I was very surprised that when the car went sideways, it flipped. Were you?
Yeah, I was. It just perfect storm, I guess. Just went straight over the wheel of Russell, and that pitched him up. I was surprised to see the roll hoop come off so easily. That's normally not supposed to happen. In my day, even my day, or even 10 years ago, we used to see these horrific barrel rolls, and the roll hoop would always stay intact. And I don't know why the roll hoop came off so easily this time. Maybe because the cars are a lot heavier. And if that's the case, then they need to strengthen up that strength of the roll hoop. Because, okay, there's a secondary prevention device there, which is the halo. And obviously the halo is what really saved his life. But still, you don't want to just leave it to the halo. You need that roll hoop to be strong as well. And Matt, I have a question for you. Do you think that accident could have been avoided in any sense? Because it really wasn't. Was it Russell's fault or was it Gasly's fault?
I thought it was well, I don't know. I think maybe Russell's because Gasly was going into the gap, wasn't he? And he saw the gap closing, and he got out of it. But unfortunately, in a sense, almost the getting out of it's what caused Russell's wheel to tap his wheel, and it just flicked Russell into the side of. So I think if anybody, it was Russell who didn't appreciate how much faster Gasly was going. The good news, of course, is that nobody was hurt, particularly GoF1 News, who was starting inside the top 10. Here he is. He's tweeted to say he's okay. Halo saved me today. And that's great news, obviously, the most important thing. He was starting inside the top 10 for the second race in a row, having out-qualified his teammate 3 races in a row. He's really doing a terrific job. And it's a shame he didn't get a chance to do 52 laps today.
Yeah. And I agree, Matt. We were saying about how Joe's had a really good start of the year, but he needs to start pushing on at some point, maybe halfway through the year, and start qualifying his teammate. He's starting to do that now, isn't he? So it's like the return of the second drivers is starting to happen. Joe's coming good, and one of your drivers as well, Mick Schumacher. He's starting to look a lot better as well, don't you think?
Yeah, it's coming together for them. Before we get on to that, I want to go back onto the accident, and there's a tweet we've got here from Jamie Price, the photographer, who's saying, not really a question, it's a statement. F1 Red flag rules are bullshit. You pause the race and you should pause everything. And it's a debate that's been going on for a while, isn't it? Because the race hadn't really started, and the cars are in the pits and they're changing tyres, they're repairing the cars and so on. I mean, personally, I have a different view to Jamie, which is that I want as many cars in the race as possible, and I think they should have allowed, I know they shouldn't have allowed, but I think I would have liked a situation where George Russell would have been allowed to take the restart and get as many cars back on the track as possible, really.
Mm. Yeah, but I understand why they couldn't allow it. I mean, it's a hard rule, isn't it? If you get outside existence, that car's not allowed to start. So there's no way in a million years they're going to let Russell start again. It's kind of amused that he tried to make it happen. But that's another thing that I thought was ludicrous, actually. Maybe it's I'm being cynical. Was George Russell getting out the car to try and help Joe? Because for me, this is not. We're not in Nordschleife, where the next marshal post is 2 kilometers away, and there's no fire marshals or anything. What does he possibly think he can do to help Joe?
Yeah,
the marshals are there, the fire guys are there, the doctors are there. Does Russell know how to remove an injured driver? Does he know how to support the neck and put in a splint? He'll just get in the way. So why he did that just flabbergasted me. Maybe he wanted to be seen to be caring, but there's absolutely nothing he could have done.
Well, I think, Alex, because you asked the question, who caused the accident? And I think you've touched it there, which is that George probably felt somewhat responsible because he's moving left. And the next thing he knows is there's an Alfa Romeo upside down and sliding on its roof towards the barrier and almost into the crowd. So I think he was feeling guilty. And I think he probably was thinking, oh dear, what have I done? But I think you're right. I mean, the memo should be, it's not 1972. You don't need to try and save the other drivers from crashed cars anymore, thankfully.
Yeah, just get in the way. But then it cost the team a chance to have a second car there, Yeah, because he could have driven that car back.
It's a very good point, because that was, he was the only person to have scored points in every single race. The only person of 21, because don't forget Nico Hulkenberg raced earlier in the year, the only one to have scored points, the only person to finish in the top 5 every race. And as you say, he kind of gave it up himself by turning a little bit of bad luck into not being able to start the race proper. We've got another question related to the accidents, because earlier in the day there was a crash in the Formula 2 race between Dennis Hauger and Roy Nissany, where Nissany pushed Dennis Hauger off the track, and then Dennis went over a sausage curb on the last 2 corners of the track and landed basically on top of Nissany's car. Luckily, again, the halo saved the driver there. And it was about sausage curbs, and the question is whether it's time to retire them. I saw another tweet which was quite amusing, which was the only sausages that we should be seeing are being served inside buns. But anyway, your opinion on sausage curbs, Alex?
So when I first read that, I thought sausage was referring to Nissany. Okay, all right. So he's talking about the curbs. Okay, right, got it now. I didn't see the incident, so I can't say. But yes, I mean, we've seen some horrific ones. Remember Monza? Was it last year? Formula 3 car hit a sausage curb and ended up right over the catch fencing, which is incredible. So yeah, they have to be very careful where they put them. But I can't comment on the incident because I didn't see it.
Yeah, I think it is a good point, because whenever I see criticism of things to do with racetrack design and safety matters in the FIA, I think to myself, hang on, there's a lot of time that's been spent designing these things, and they're not there by accident. So anyway, I think it's a good topic to be debated, but I don't think either of us have the answer today. The answer I do have, which might surprise you, I'm jumping ahead slightly in my mind here, is who's going to be on our performance chart for this British Grand Prix. And I'm going to before it comes up on the screen, hopefully, just before it comes up on the screen, can you guess who it is, Alex? Who's the driver who gained the most places from his starting position? Almost. Let's show it. Let's show it.
Oh, let's have a look.
Yeah, very good. Ooh. Look at that. There's a graphic which we might have dreamed would happen, but to actually see it is really rather wonderful. There it is. So
yeah. So his first points ever, right, Matt? And I'm starting to get. I mean, we've always said this about Mick's not the most naturally talented driver you ever meet, but he's a driver that knows how to grind, and gets better and better and better and better. We saw him in F3 do that. We saw him in F2 do that. Maybe that's starting to happen now. Maybe he's starting to figure some stuff out. I hope so for his sake, but what a great drive.
Yeah, certainly gaining some confidence. It was very nice. Made up 11 places, scoring his maiden points. He got 8th place, and of course his teammate Kevin Magnussen finished in 10th. So it's double point score for the Haas team, which they'll be very pleased with. It's been a difficult season for them. And then Sebastian Vettel, just checking here. Yes, so Sebastian Vettel made up 9 places. Was doing a good job actually, and also benefited from, like a lot of people did, but obviously not everybody can benefit. So my wife's not entirely a fan of the new hairstyle, but putting that aside, it was a good drive from him today, and benefited from the safety car and got the Aston Martin into the points. His teammate Lance Stroll was 11th. Also did pretty well because of the safety car, but didn't manage to get into the points today. So birthday boy Sebastian Vettel, age 35, getting into the points for Aston Martin today. Let's have a look at the Constructors Championship actually and see how all of that's panned out. Red Bull Racing, unsurprisingly, still in the lead with 328 points over Ferrari 265. Obviously, Ferrari closing in a little bit now with their double points score today, double right up the front, I guess I should be saying. Mercedes third with 204 points, McLaren fourth on 73. They're in quite a fight now with Alpine, who've got 67 points, Alfa Romeo sixth with 51, AlphaTauri 27 points, Haas with 20 and 8th, Aston Martin 9th, and Williams back there in 10th. Anything there that stands out for you, Alex, of the constructor standings?
It's still very close for that battle for 4th position, but I just get the feeling that McLaren and Alpine are starting to edge out a little bit, and it might only be those 2 cars fighting for best of the rest.
I thought it was quite interesting that Red Bull have had 4, because we're talking about the mechanical failures of the 2 teams last time around, weren't we? They've had 4 in-race failures before the British Grand Prix, and to some degree, I suppose, it was a 5th today, but I think we're probably going to say today was crash damage, wasn't it, on Max's car rather than actually a mechanical failure. And Alfa Romeo had a double DNF today. Of course, Joe's was a crash. Valtteri's looked like some kind of technical problem. The first time since the beginning of this year that they've had that. So, yeah. Let's look at the Drivers' Championship. Coming into this race, Max Verstappen was 46 points ahead of Sergio Perez. He is no longer. He's only, I'm going to try and do the maths in my head now, 34. There you go. So Sergio's closing in. Charles Leclerc's dropped away a bit. He's now in 3rd with 138 points. Carlos Sainz jumps ahead of George Russell. As we talked about before, George failing to score points today. Carlos now 4th and closing in on his teammate. George is 5th. Lewis Hamilton is 6th with 93 points. Lando Norris 7th with 58 ahead of Valtteri Bottas with 46 points. And then the 2 Alpine drivers, Fernando Alonso with 39 and his teammate Esteban Ocon with 28. So Max Verstappen had a pretty bad day today, but he does still lead the World Drivers' Championship. I guess that's the most important thing. And I wanted to get, inside the mind of Max Verstappen through talking to somebody who's known him, basically since before he was born, because he was covering his father, Jos Verstappen's motor racing career. His name is Olaf Mol. He's probably the voice of Formula One in the Netherlands. And I asked him how he rates the 24-year-old Max Verstappen's form so far this year.
I think he's having better than ever. I think he's... The trick is he came into Formula One as the youngest, but his goal was to become world champion. He's ticked that box. He's not doing luckily, he's not doing a Nico Rosberg. Well, I'm world champion. That's it. Bye-bye. I'm out of here. But I feel I wouldn't be surprised if he gets another world title or maybe 2. And then at a certain point he says, well, okay, been here, done it, dusted it. Yeah, I can continue for another 10 years and make even more money than I do. But there's also funny things in life. I like to go to a circuit with my family because him and Jos, they have a rally car, they have some Porsche where they do some track days with family every now and then they're having fun. And if you've been on circuits ever since you're 5 years old, every weekend competing, you look for some fun. And then you go logically, you're going to live in Monaco.
Were you surprised how close Sergio was to Max?
It was necessary, so I was very happy about it. And then sometimes if he has a free practice 1 or 2 where he's 6 or 7, I said he's falling back to his 21 standard. I think the trick of the new car was that the car itself was neutral. It didn't have much oversteer, didn't have much understeer. And I know that Max likes a pointy car. Why is George Russell doing what he's doing? George Russell is used of driving, with his Williams, because that's what he's done, is used of driving a car which is not perfect, but take 110% out of it. And Lewis had a 110% car, which he could, at 105%, win multiple races with. That still wasn't easy. That still was very difficult, and kudos to him. But right now, as Mercedes is in 22, it's comfort zone for George because he's used having a car like that.
Yeah.
And Lewis is just saying, yeah, but I'm missing this and I'm missing that and I'm missing this and I'm not used to miss that.
I had a wonderful conversation with Olav, and it went on for about 25 minutes. And the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is you can see almost all of it if you go to our YouTube channel. Just search GoF1 Show. Of course, we can't fit all of these, the full length of these interviews into our live shows, but we do now put them up on our YouTube channel, GoF1 Show, for your enjoyment. There's plenty of things up there. Of course, Olav is one of them, but there's almost every interview you're going to see now on our show. There'll be a full-length version, some behind-the-scenes stuff, some more amusing, perhaps, say, and candid comments, as there certainly were from Olav. So I recommend you go to YouTube and take a look at those after our show. Right then, Max Verstappen. We got inside the mind slightly there. Olav thinks he's in the form of his life. It's difficult to disagree, isn't it, Alex?
Yeah. I think you can always improve, but I think about 2 years ago, I could already see he had become a complete driver that was ready to win world championships, just didn't have the car. And I was especially impressed last year how he kept his cool when things didn't go his own way, because the Red Bull overall the whole year was not as quick as the Merc, but he still won the championship. Yes, he got a bit lucky at the last race at Abu Dhabi with some strange calls from race control, but the way he was so calm and collected, and that's a thing in his bow that he's had from a very young age that's been super impressive. Because Verstappen's actually a very fiery character. He's like his dad, but doesn't lose control at the wrong moment, and he's able to channel that aggression very, very well. And that's one of his biggest strengths that I think stands out. Hamilton's like this. There have been past champions in the past that are not like this. Alonso's not like this at all, and you could argue that's why he's lost. He hasn't got more than 2 world titles. But Verstappen, there are no weaknesses there. Oh,
yeah, 100%. And if I'd asked him, yes, there is one.
I can think of one small weakness. He hasn't done enough. He hasn't won enough on street races. He hasn't dominated on a street race yet. We've seen him win on a street race. We've seen him be quick. But I've not seen him dominate on a street race. And all the greats, have always dominated in tricky conditions, in the wet. And Verstappen's done that many times. But I've never seen him dominate where you're just like, wow, at a street track yet. So I'm still waiting for that to happen.
Last time around, we were talking about the Charles Leclerc Max Verstappen championship battle, and you asked the question, can we see that graph comparing Red Bull with Ferrari? And your wish has been delivered, thanks to Tessa in our graphics department. Here it is, look. And in particular, it's showing from the first race of the season in Bahrain, when Ferrari left Bahrain with a 44-point advantage. We've now got Red Bull 63 points ahead after the British Grand Prix. But of course, the graph is closing there again. That's why I thought it was good to show that today, because with the sort of difficult, almost disastrous day for Red Bull and Ferrari's very strong day, at least with Carlos, the battle continues to rage between those two teams at the top of the Constructors Championship. Now, later in the show, we're going to be getting caught up with the latest from the Formula 2 series. We're going to chat with Adam Stern from Sports Business Journal about the success story that is Formula 1 in the USA. But first, a word from our sponsor at WebEx.
Late breaking. What do you think?
Love it or no chance?
Daniel, no chance.
Let's put up a poll.
Love it, love it, love it wins.
We need that part.
It's nearly done.
Can you repeat that? That's better.
It's done.
With WebEx, the McLaren Formula One team is collaborating like never before. Introducing the WebEx Suite, driving hybrid work.
So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Quick recap of the results of the British Grand Prix. Carlos Sainz won his first Formula One Grand Prix from Sergio Perez of Red Bull and from Lewis Hamilton of Mercedes. There are the results. As you can see, Max Verstappen leading the World Championship still from Sergio Perez is finished only 7th in the British Grand Prix. Now, when Liberty Media took over Formula One, it was arguably, Formula One this is, at its least popular in the USA. And to find out how things have changed, and dramatically is the answer, I got on the phone earlier this week with Adam Stern from Sports Business Journal.
Other bidders who were in serious contention, which was Comcast, NBC, and Amazon, have been informed that they're not going to have their bids accepted. So, ESPN and F1 are now kind of putting it to paper and finalizing the contract. So I think it'll be announced in the next couple of weeks. It was probably the most logical decision, the safest decision. There's such a big broadcast in the US that people around the country will literally just leave their TV on ESPN all day if they're huge sports fans. People who are not even big F1 fans might just run into, because it's such a big platform, it made sense for them to renew. But what is fascinating is Amazon bid more than ESPN from what we understand. So ESPN's bid came in around $75 to $90 million annually. It sounds like Amazon came in closer to $100 million. To just pay a couple million more than ESPN, it wasn't enough right now, because the F1 executives and Liberty Media executives, they know that the biggest platform currently for U.S. sports media is still ESPN.
It sounds like actually Formula One should be paying ESPN to help them grow the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been so symbiotic. You're exactly right. And they were previously with NBC Sports in the U.S. for their media rights. They decided to go on a flyer with ESPN and see if it would work. They took no money at first, literally went for free. Now ESPN has this really sexy property that they're aligned with. There's going to be 3 races in the U.S. next year, as we know, 6 overall in the Americas if you include Central and South America. They did not want to lose this property. So, I mean, they're paying 1,500% more. That shows you how much they wanted to keep this.
And what does the future hold for F1? Is it continued growth, or does it have challenges ahead, do you think?
That's a great question. I think by and large, there's a lot of great things going on. Obviously, like we said, they're adding a 3rd race next year. But at the same time, I will say, American sports fans, they really want to be entertained. Last year was so exciting. F1's going to have to be able to replicate that to keep American fans, these new American fans who are not diehard petrol guys.
That was a really fascinating conversation with Adam, who really has his finger on the pulse of actually most sports, but in particular in this case, the success of Formula One. I suppose the success of Formula One in now demanding, requesting, whatever it is, certainly getting a much higher rights fee for the TV rights in the USA than they were having before. I suppose the question, Alex, is if it's so successful in the US, what's happening out here in Asia? Because, I mean, we know very well that Fox Sports Asia closed end of September last year. And at the moment, viewers in our part of the world, unless they're tuned into the GoF1 show, which of course most of them probably are, it's a very fragmented TV landscape.
Yeah, so where do we start with that? Obviously, I mean, there are a lot of Formula One fans. We get a lot of messages all the time saying, when we're going to get regional coverage again, and hopefully that will start soon. And I mean, I'm biased. I love Formula One, but what do you think, Matt? Do you think we'll ever get back to having some proper coverage here in Asia?
Well, here's the thing. There's 6,000, as I'm looking at my Twitter, there's 6,000 people currently watching this show live at, well, not all of them are in Asia, of course, but it's 1:30 in the morning as we're live at the moment. I feel that it's very difficult because, as we know, because we live here, Asia is not a single market, of course. It's a dozen and each of those dozen markets, like everyone, is complicated. But I do think that Formula One could benefit hugely if they actually took the time now to invest over 5 or maybe even 10 years. I think it needs a decade. They need a proper strategy, I'm not saying they haven't got one, but I think they certainly need one, like they have done in the USA. And I think it needs I discussed this also with Ollie Moll, and it's part of the YouTube full-length 22-minute discussion that I recommended. That perhaps there needs to be a kind of free-to-air version of the show that goes out in local language, Formula One, and you go up the pyramid to the more esoteric niche style of programming that people in the UK enjoy on Sky.
Yeah, and to be honest, they need to rethink completely the strategy here. Actually, now you said it, you reminded me what's the biggest problem with Asia is that Formula One comes in as a circus, turns up, takes a whole bunch of money and disappears. Does nothing for the local community, does nothing for helping grow the sports here. And again, it's difficult because there's so many different countries. But I suppose that's why I focus so much on esports these days, because at least then we can reach out to a lot more people. We can drive on a lot more tracks, try and do a lot more cars. Formula One's always going to be Formula One, but if they really want to grow the interest here, they need to focus on motorsport, because anyone that follows motorsport will follow Formula One. So they need to go hand in hand with the FIA and see what they can do to help promote more local motorsport in this continent.
And it's a very good point, because it's been over a decade now, hasn't it? 2011 was the last time we saw a driver from this part of the world, including India. That was Karun Chandhok, in a seat in Formula One, of course, not including Japanese drivers. There is another Indian, of course. His name is Jahan Daruvala, who's 23 years of age. And to catch up on how he's doing, I caught up earlier today, actually, with the Indian journalist Abhishek Takle.
Yeah, a very important moment, as you said, Matthew. He obviously drove a Formula One car for the first time. He was driving last year's race-winning 2021 McLaren. Over 2 days, and it all went well. He covered over 130 trouble-free laps. This test was crucial for 2 reasons. For starters, he's now eligible for a Formula One super license. He already had the points, and now he's got the mileage that he needs in a modern Formula One car in that sense as well. And personally for him, his first taste of F1 machinery. So, that basically, at that level, you can drive a Formula One car, but once you've actually done it and done it trouble-free, it ticks that box and gives you that sort of validation and confidence, I guess.
Box ticked in. We've just completed round 7 of this year's Formula 2 Championship. How is that going for him?
Silverstone was a difficult weekend, but overall, I'd say he's had a very strong and consistent year. On the podium 5 out of 7 rounds. His main championship rivals, Theo Pourchaire and Felipe Dragovic, and now Logan Sargent, they've taken their big results in the feature races. Jehan's had some issues in feature races. Luck hasn't always gone his way. He should have won in Barcelona on the Sunday, but his car failed. He should have won in Imola, but an ill-timed safety car sort of strategically took the initiative away from him. But I think overall he needs to qualify better. That'll set him up better for sort of results in the feature race, but he also needs luck to go his way a little bit now.
You've been watching the Indian driver Jahan Daruvala. What do you think, Alex? Has he got what it's made? I'm asking that question under the heading of Zhou Guanyu was fast, but wasn't mega, was he? And he's turned up in Formula One and he's been very solid. Could Jahan do the same?
They're very similar in many ways. I remember watching Jahan 2011, maybe. He was doing cadet cuts here in Asia, and he used to race with the Mani brothers as well. And at that age, I think Kush looked like the better prospect out of the 3. But Jahan always had the right backing. He always had the most support. So we always knew out of everyone, Jahan was probably going to have the right opportunities to get to Formula One. And he's progressed exactly as I thought he would. Perhaps not as well as I had hoped. I had hoped that he would have been doing what Joe did last year, where he was really in the hunt for the championship. And I feel he really needs to do that. He's got the right backing. Yeah, so, hey, we're only halfway through the season. Let's see what he can do, But if he can do something special, You know, maybe he can convince the Formula One team to take him next year. And this is his second year in Formula 2, isn't it? So perhaps Jehan he needs a third year maybe before he's ready for Formula 1.
Yeah, I did talk to Abhishek in more detail about what he thinks about Jehan's Formula 1 chances, and he does think that he could do well in a Formula 1 car after that McLaren test run that we talked about. Again, that's something that you can see on the YouTube channel as the full-length conversation. Let's have a quick recap of the Formula 2 Championship standings. Felipe Drugovich is leading at the moment. Here it is with 148 points. He's had an amazing season, the Brazilian, ahead of Teo Pourchaire. And then Logan Sargent took Jehan's third place in the championship with a brilliant victory today for the Carlin team in the feature race at Silverstone. There it is. Those are the driver standings. Formula 2, really fantastic racing this year. It's a really strong season. So perhaps that's actually goes in Jehan Daruvala's favour, that he's doing a great job against very stiff competition.
If I may just,
so that's all about time we've got for on today's show. Next week's. Do you want to add something, Alex, there about Formula 2?
Yeah, I just want to say I was really impressed with Logan Sargent this weekend. To be honest, I feel this year's F2 field is not as strong as we have seen in previous seasons. But the way I saw Logan Sargent drive, especially in qualifying, I'm seeing something quite special there. And he's American, Matt, so let's not forget this.
Yeah.
This might be right timing for an American driver who has grown up in Europe and done all his education in Europe to start reaching the heights, because F1 does need an American driver.
It does. It does need an American driver. That's a very good point. So from one end of the age scale with the Formula 2 drivers to the perhaps not entirely the other end of the scale, but certainly somebody celebrating their birthday today, 35-year-old Sebastian Vettel. He's got a really keen sense of history, hasn't he? And he has bought Nigel Mansell's Formula 1. Here he is celebrating his birthday with a nice cake there. The Aston Martin team have made for him. And also celebrated by taking you could almost call it the classic Williams FW14 that Nigel Mansell used to win the British Grand Prix 30 years ago. There is Seb with those fantastic race overalls he had made to kind of look pretty similar to those that Nigel wore in period, but with this race without trace concept that Seb's putting forward for racing with carbon neutral fuel. So it's really good to see Seb drive that car.
Awesome, it really was.
So it's about, yeah, and it sounded great, didn't it? That's about all we've got time for on today's show. Not long to wait until the next Grand Prix, of course. Round 11 comes from Austria, and we've got a very special guest next time around. But before we talk about that, let's have a quick look at it. And it's round 11, as I said, in Spielberg, July the 10th. As always, Alex, putting you on the spot. Now that you've seen how Red Bull was so strong here at Silverstone, who do you predict for Austria?
I'm going to say actually the Ferrari's going to be strong at Austria. A few races ago, I was going to say it's definitely Red Bull territory. But I actually think Ferrari's going to be very strong. Changed my mind.
So as I was talking earlier, we've got a very special guest coming on the show next week, 61 Grand Prix in his 5-year Formula 1 career. His name is Mark Blundell. He raced for Brabham and McLaren. He's, for many people, perhaps most famous for the Le Mans 24 Hours, where he was actually on pole position at one point by 6 seconds when he raced for Nissan. Here he is racing for McLaren, that wonderful livery that we used to see, and actually a wonderful crash helmet livery. And more recently, Mark actually drove in the British Touring Car Championship, now has a team in that series. So looking very much forward to having Mark join Alex and I next week for our Austrian Grand Prix debrief show. Thanks very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. A little reminder, if you're not already a follower, a subscriber, please do so on of course, Twitter, and perhaps also on YouTube, perhaps also on Facebook, whichever one you wish to follow us on. And if you like what you're seeing, please give us a thumbs up. And also, as I mentioned earlier, check out our YouTube channel, which is a kind of a library of longer form content. It's been great having you with us. It's been great having you with us, Alex Yoong. Thanks very much indeed for your time. We'll see you again next week. Ciao.
Bye.